I continue with chapter 1 from The Warrior Queens, the legends and the lives of the women who have led their nations in war, by Antonia Fraser. Gifted historian and a terrific storyteller, provides useful instruction for women doing battle today. Chapter 1, The Singular Exception, page 3. A singular exception? A woman is often acknowledged the absolute sovereign of a great kingdom, in which she would be deemed incapable of exercising the smallest employment, civil or military. Written by Gibbon from Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. The stark tale of Boadicea, stand against the Romans, flashes afresh to hold and horrify with each generation. Every British school child learns her story, and lest for a moment we forget her, on the bank of the Thames, not far from the House of Parliament, she stands aloft in her chariot, knives sprouting from its wheels, and it is in fact those murderous knives which stamp our perception of her indelibly. Hers is a gallant and a savage story. Even as we bow the knee, we shudder and step back as the warrior queen rides by. For all the strength of this image, depictions of Boadicea, be they in art or caricature, are made instantly recognizable by use of this detail. Boadicea's chariot did not actually have knives or scythes affixed to its wheels. This is one of the very few statements which can be made with any certainty concerning her. Thus, one of the most powerful figures in our history, in terms of popular imagination, one who did unquestionably exist in the period assigned to her. Unlike King Arthur, no chivalric monarch if he did exist, but a 6th century Romano-British commander. Survives by virtue of an image which is in itself spurious. This is an apt illustration of the paradox which lies at the heart of the subject of Queen Boadicea, and by extension that of the warrior queen in general. Of course, the name Boadicea itself is not genuine either. That is the name generally employed in the prolific allusions made to her in contemporary society. It would be a rare day which did not produce at least one in the British press. Okay, got a little side note here from that piece. It states the date of Boadicea or Boudica's rebellion, AD 60 or 61, is another matter in dispute. As to how Boudica is or was to be pronounced, one can only observe that an expedition of archaeological inquiry by the author to East Anglia in 1985 produced 3 separate pronunciations from the first 3 experts encountered, i.e. Boudica, Boudica and Boudica. Okay, looks like we'll be saying that different now, won't we? This is something which is only partly dependent on the emergence of a female prime minister, although, as we shall see, certain specific military situations, such as the Falklands War, can produce a bristling harvest of such comparisons. Since Boudica's name can be and is invoked in a variety of different contexts, nor is our own age unique in this respect, the unwithered, infinite variety of Queen Boudica's images, as perceived down our history, begin one of the themes of this book. While Boudica remains, therefore, the convenient name for what may be termed the fabulous queen, driving her cruelly accoutred carriage, and it will be used for that queen in this book. A clutch of other names have been proposed as being more plausible in relation to the woman herself. Our own honor, Boadicea, or Boudica, by some Boudinica and Bundica, Queen of the Iceni, was Ben Jonson's somewhat despairing description in the Masque of Queens. It is a desperation that a modern chronicler of Queen Boudica's fortunes can share, although Ben Jonson cited only a few of the possible variants. This uncertainty, jostling the warrior queen's actual name, its spelling and derivation, may also be seen as part of the paradox. The extreme fame of Boudica contrasts with the extreme ignorance, and in many instances, actual misapprehension about her. It is Boudica, given by Tacitus, which is in fact the only contemporary rendering of the name which has come down to us. As a result, it has been in the past relished by the learned, as Winston Churchill phrased it, Boadicea, sounding so different to our ears, is actually only 2 letters apart from Boudica, and the famous name is thus probably based on accurate transcriptions of Tacitus Boudica. Hang on, I gotta get a drink. It's like my mouth's fighting these words. Okay, where was I? It's over here. In recent years, however, the learned have lost some of their relish for Boudica. It is suggested on philosophical evidence that Tacitus was in error. Boudica must have been the correct spelling, Boudica. This brings the British warrior queen's name in line with the various Celtic words for victory, notably the Old Welsh Buda. It also means happily. That Boudicca too can claim to be described as Queen Victoria, as was not infrequently noted in the late 19th century. For these 2 reasons, scholarly and sentimental, Boudica will be the name adopted for the historic figure who led the AD 60-61 rebellion against the Romans, where Boadicea will be used for the legendary character. Boy, I've already messed that up now, haven't I? We'll figure it out together. Okay, so when they spell it different, it matters. That's what I'm seeing here. So we got Boudica, or Boudica, and then we have Boadicea. And that's the way I'm going to say it when we're talking about the legendary character. But the actual historic figure is Boudica. Alright. Other variants will be encountered and their origins traced in the course of Boadicea's latter-day history. At the moment, it is enough to point out that this ambivalence towards Boadicea's name, like the misapprehensions concerning her career and circumstances, is also part of her aura. It has even allowed her at times to flourish under two separate identities. In the late 16th century, for example, an enterprising Florentine scholar courtier named Petruccio Ubaldini, seeking royal patronage in England, wrote 2 volumes about the lives of illustrious ladies of yore and dedicated them to Queen Elizabeth. To satisfy the most pedantic readers, as he put it, he decided to divide the characters of Bonducia and Boadicea, although the distinction was of course a mistaken one, arising out of the confusion produced by these endless variations of spelling. Faced with the stories of 2 queens which were, as he honestly admitted, astonishingly similar, Ubaldini's boldly decided to derive a different moral from each. The moral of Bonducia's story is thus that cruelty destroys any praise for honorable courage. That of Boadicea, tyranny often brings intolerable wickedness which provokes in its victims a thirst for revenge. As a matter of fact, both these morals can be derived quite correctly from Boadicea's story, although in modern parlance we might prefer to transform Ubaldini's morals into questions. Was Boadicea a savage attempting to destroy a superior civilization in a series of atrocities, a female savage to boot? Or was she a patriotic leader, rising up against an alien and brutal, occupying power? Suffice it to say for the moment that in this respect of the existence of so many variations of her name has evidently been a positive advantage in the promotion of her legend. Thus, the learned Boudica can easily possess quite different characteristics from the chariot-driving heroine aloft on London's embankment without troubling the national consciousness too much. This celebrated warrior queen turns out to be like Proteus, he who could assume different shapes at will, beginning with her very name. Returning to warrior queens in general and the paradox which they present, it will be found that the Protean quality is something which many of them have in common with Boadicea. The central nature of this paradox can be stated as follows. Whereas women whereas woman has, on the whole, taking the rough with the smooth, the good epics with the bad, been considered inferior to man throughout history. The arrival of a warrior queen, by whatever accident of fate, descent, or sheer character, has been the signal for a remarkable outburst of excitement and even awe, sometimes accompanied by admiration and enthusiasm for her cause, beyond the ability of a mere male to arouse. In men's apparel, hanging about her the skins of beasts, before and behind, with a sword about her neck, an axe at her girdle, and a bow and arrows in her hand, leaping, according to the custom, now here, now there, as nimbly as the most active among her attendants, all the while striking her enigma, that is, 2 iron bells, which serve her instead of drums. Thus the Dutch Captain Fuller, commander of her personal bodyguard, admiringly described the 17th century Queen Ginga of Angola in her long battles against the Portuguese invaders. To Fuller, Ginga was a cunning and prudent virago, despite or even because of her habit of keeping 50 or 60 young men as husbands, and another habit of human sacrifice. He served her faithfully for many years. Conversely, the emergence of a warrior queen has at other times been accompanied by disgust and fear at her very existence, emotions which would never be aroused by a male leader accompanying the same position. Queen Ginga, the nightmare of the armed and ferocious Amazon, came to life, was viewed quite differently by her Portuguese enemies. To those on the other side, the actual atrocities committed or instigated by a woman leader bring about a special shudder, which recalls our reaction to the knives on Boadicea's chariot. It is not so much the mythical weapons themselves as the woman driving the chariot, which gives us surely that special frisson. Part of this frisson of fear or admiration is undoubtedly due to the fact that woman as a whole has been seen as a pacifying influence throughout history, this pacifying role being perceived as hers by nature and hers in duty. The whole question whether women actually are more pacific by nature is not the subject of the present book. For our purposes, it is, however, highly relevant that they have been perceived as such. Some feminist writers have recently promulgated strongly the notion that a matriarchal society would or did lack the aggression that does and did characterize a patriarchal one. Evidently, non-pacific types such as Mr. Gandhi, Mrs. Mere, and Mrs. Thatcher count as honorary men for the purposes of this argument because they have adopted masculine values in order to succeed in the patriarchal world. And I know, in the depth of my being, and in all my knowledge of history and humanity, I know women will struggle for a social order of peace, equality, and joy, wrote the distinguished historian of women Joanne Kelly in 1982 on the eve of her death. On the other hand, Lynn Siegel, author of Is the Future Female?, expressed another view in an interview in 1987. I accept that women are gentler at the moment, but if they had the same amount of power as men, they wouldn't be more virtuous. But the argument is not a novel one. The writings of Christine de Pizan in the 14th century drew attention to the pacifying potential of the good princess. Supposed weakness is in fact often a moral strength, she wrote, as when women who are physically weak and timid are therefore more inclined to make peace and advert wars. She added, citing the work of Queen Blanche, mother of St. Louis, "Oh God, how many great blessings in the world have often been caused by queens and princesses making peace between enemies." Thus, in a sense, the concept of the warrior queen cuts across not only man's view of a woman's traditional weakness, but also women's view of her own ordained role as a peacemaker. Nevertheless, almost every culture throughout history has had its warrior queen or queens, either in fact or in fiction, or in some combination of them both. The United States of America is so far one of the significant exceptions, in spite of the singular address and happy boldness which Alexis de Tocqueville discovered in its unmarried young ladies as long ago as 1835, when a possible future warrior queen was presented in the 1984 vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro. The reaction was, as will be seen, extremely uneasy. The Roman Empire, for all the host of noteworthy impresses, those celebrated, strong-minded, and sometimes disreputable women, was another imperium, where an actual female reign would, as Gibbon pointed out, have appeared in an expiable progeny. It is certainly of importance to the story of Boudica, and her uprising against the Roman regime in Britain, that she herself, in her gender as well as in her independence, bore something at least of the appearance of a prodigy, and an unwelcome one, to the occupying power. But of course, both Rome then and the United States now have experience of dealing with foreign warrior queens. The opportunity should be taken to define the way in which the term will be understood in the present study. A potential warrior queen, in the modern sense, is one who might, under certain circumstances, have to take the decision to deploy her country's military resources. Thus, for these purposes, Mrs. Thatcher, at the time of the Falklands War, played the warrior queen, while Queen Elizabeth II was merely the reigning monarch. In the historical sense, on the other hand, a warrior queen will be regarded as one who combined both elements of rule and and martial leadership. It must therefore be emphasized that Joan of Arc, although admittedly a frequent source of inspiration to many warrior queens, was not actually one herself in our terms. Since she led but did not rule, like the heroic General Harriet Tubman, who commanded an action in the American Civil War, Joan of Arc belongs to that other wider category of women warriors. Fascinating, but more diffuse subject than that of the present study. Women have fought, literally fought, as a normal part of the army in far more epochs and far more civilizations than is generally appreciated. Similarly, Judith, the pious assassin of Holofernes, another frequently cited comparison, belongs to the category of warrior woman or maid, although as a matter of fact the historical Judith was a widow. If one examines the saying of Mohammed, "The men perish if they obey the women," or another of his alleged quips regarding a princess on the Persian throne, "No people who place a woman over their affairs prosper," the lesson of history does not exactly confirm the truth of this notion. On the contrary, a warrior queen or female ruler has often provided the focus for what a country afterwards perceived to have been its golden age. Beyond the obvious example, to the English, of Queen Elizabeth I, one might cite the 12th century Queen Tamara of Georgia, or the 15th century Isabella of Spain. The extra value of a warrior queen as a rallying point for the chivalric feelings of her nations will be one of the recurring themes of this book. Returning to America and its present culture, the United States does, of course, lack a hereditary monarchy, which for better or for worse is a system inclined to throw up such things as queens, and thus by implication warrior queens, from time to time. The irony of this situation was summed up by Gibbon, and here's his summation. It's a little paragraph here. In every age the country, the wiser, or at least the stronger, of the two sexes, has usurped the powers of the state, and confined the other to the cares and pleasures of domestic life. In hereditary monarchies, however, and especially in those of modern Europe, the gallant spirit of chivalry and the law of succession have accustomed us to allow a singular exception, and a woman is often acknowledged the absolute sovereign of a great kingdom in which she would be deemed incapable of exercising the smallest employment, civil or military. End that part. So we have an extension to the paradox of the warrior queen. The phenomenon is found almost everywhere, if not within a culture by conflict with another culture. Yet the person concerned is generally regarded as the singular exception, and that very singularity, for better or for worse, provides her aura. There is, after all, a good deal to be said in purely practical terms for General de Gaulle's view of the omnipresence of force in history. It is possible to conceive of life without, is it possible to conceive of life without force? He wrote, in The Edge of the Sword, force has watched over civilization in the cradle. Force has ruled empires and dug the grave of decadence. It is true to say that the fighting spirit, the art of war, the virtues of the soldier are an integral part of man's inheritance. They have been part and parcel of history in all its phases, the medium through which it has expressed itself. He concluded that the noblest teachings of philosophy and religion have found no higher ideals than those of self-sacrifice for the sake of the community. Suffering made glorious. These two things, which are the basic elements of the profession of arms. One can gainsay de Gaulle's conclusion, or at least his overall description of the profession of arms, without contradicting his general and even obvious point that history can be interrupted at one level as the history of force. If this be true, and more importantly, society itself has believed it to be true, then on the one hand, the traditional lack of involvement of women in the world of force will add to her air of inferiority. On the other hand, her involvement in that world, when it occurs, stands a good chance of raising her status. As Tacitus wrote of the warlike Germans, renown is easiest won among perils. To put it another way, many women leaders have found in the crucible of war, if successfully survived, the fiery process which has guaranteed them passage into the realms of honorary men. It is because all history has been made by men, and it is still a world that belongs to men. In the words of Simone de Beauvoir, that the characters and career of those women who have been the singular exception become crucial. Such careers have always afforded much of interest to both sexes, not just because the tradition of independent womanhood is kept alive for the female sex in darker days. The same names will be found recited over and over again, like an encouraging or admonitory litany, the moment a new warrior queen appears. Not merely Boadicea herself, but Penthelia, Judith, Semiramis, and Zenobia from ancient times are evoked in this roll call of the armed and female faithful. Zenobia drew upon comparisons to Cleopatra, from whom she claimed to be descended. Dio Cassius compared Boadicea to Semiramis. Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great frequently compared, in their own time, to the above. Catherine, to her admiring correspondent Voltaire, was his Semiramis of the North. Themselves provided the rich sources of historical comparison and appealed to bygone heroines as a source of strength and above all validity, would indeed appear to be exceptionally important where female leaders are concerned, down to our own day. The unnatural, even bizarre aspect of a woman in such a role, that boisterousness with which she terrifies us, in the words of an 18th century commentator on Boadicea, is thus tacitly admitted, before being justified by this erroneous appeal to the past. The names of the heroines cited do, of course, vary to a certain degree, but not nearly as much as the character and circumstances of the women citing them. At the time of the Falklands War, Mrs. Thatcher, as Prime Minister, neatly recalled Queen Victoria by quoting her in a television broadcast. Failure possibilities do not exist. The evocation of the strong and successful female image was surely as important as the sentiment, although inspection reveals little in common between the 19th century hereditary monarch and the late 20th century democratically elected leader, except their sex. It is also true that exactly the same names from this important but limited female pantheon can be used to insult, while the nature of the insult can also vary. When Dennis Healey, as a senior labor statesman, reflected that Miss Thatcher reminded him very much of Catherine the Great, he was not, of course, referring to the former's impeccable private life, but to the imperiousness allied to a temperament which is in many ways very masculine, which he considered both ladies had in common. Yet the allusion to Catherine the Great, Voltaire's Semiramis of the North, like that to Semiramis herself, is one which could in different circumstances bear a sexual connotation, since both the 9th century Semiramis and the 18th century AD Catherine the Great might be described, at least in popular terms, as a great sovereign and a great lover. Boccaccio, in the 14th century, delineated Semiramis as one who, on the one hand, showed that in order to govern it is not necessary to be a man, but to have courage, and on the other hand, gave herself to many men along the way. The presumed sexual veracity of a warrior queen, at least up till the 20th century, will be found to be one of the recurring themes of her treatment at the hands of her contemporaries and of history. Conversely, but not contradictorily, another theme will be found to be her chastity, on occasion maintained, according to the myth, under the most remarkable circumstances, against all the available evidence. Sometimes the same woman, such as Matilda of Tuscany, whom we shall find leading her men in the cause of the 11th century Pope Gregory VII, bears both accusations. This treatment of the warrior queen as a supernaturally chaste creature, put against that other image of her as preternaturally lustful, the voracity syndrome seems to indicate that because her sex is first and foremost what makes the warrior queen remarkable, her sexuality must always be called into question as well. Other themes will be found to occur and recur. That of the Holy Lady of Victory. Okay, wait a minute. Other themes will be found to occur and recur. That of the holy and sometimes armed figurehead is one of them. From the Arab Lady of Victory to Isabella the Catholic, scourge of the Spanish Moors, such characters frequently also forming part of the chaste syndrome. Okay, I want to pause for a second. Then the appendage syndrome runs through the whole book. The stressed connection of so many warrior queens to the nearest strong masculine figure. In turn, the shame syndrome, whereby all the surrounding masculine figures are described as failing in courage compared to the warrior queen herself, underlies in another way the purely masculine context in which most warrior queens have operated. It is this context which has enabled many a warrior queen endowed with a partner to be hailed as the better man of the two. Conversely, the only a weak woman syndrome has the normally robust female leading, indulging in a sudden diplomatic outbreak of modesty, pleading the notorious weakness of her sex, generally for good practical reasons of self-interest. It is indeed the recurrence of themes which gives the warrior queens chosen for discussion here their special significance. As has been stated, this is not intended to be an encyclopedic work on a vast subject, and even such compelling figures as the real, not the operatic Brunhilde, a 6th century Visigothic queen of Austrasia, or the ferocious Nanny, wife of old Cudjoe, chief of the Maroons, who led a 17th century uprising in Jamaica, do not necessarily find a place in it. One important theme may be termed the tomboy syndrome, whereby the warrior queen in youth, all unknowing of her marital destiny, is depicted as unconsciously eschewing dolls in favor of soldiers, domestic pursuits in favor of hunting. The tomboy syndrome, in particular, demonstrates the perpetual need for reassurance, which the emergence of a warrior queen seems to evoke. This woman is not like other women, runs the refrain. This being so, her strangeness should be established from the start. A quotation from the start of one of the many historical romances in English on the subject of Boadicea shows that the tomboy syndrome in particular demonstrates the perpetual need for reassurance which the emergence of a warrior queen seems to evoke. This woman is not like other women, runs the refrain. This being so, her strangeness should be established from the start. A quotation from the start of one of many historical romances in English on the subject of Boadicea shows that the British Queen is certainly not immune from the syndrome. "Wait for us, Boadicea. That horse of yours must have invisible wings to carry you at such speed." So runs Boadicea by Betty King, published in 1975. Absolutely nothing is in fact known about the childhood of Boadicea. Boadicea is selected as the pivot of this book, partly for the fascinating combination of fame and ambiguity which her career provides, partly because so many of the themes which recur in the treatment of other warrior queens are raised in her story and its subsequent treatment. Stories of these other historic warrior queens are brought forward where relevant, not only to supplement hers, but also to illustrate the universality of the subject. But it is Boadicea who is a convenient starting point, and Boadicea who is the engrossing exemplar. Nevertheless, the first task, before turning to the true story of Boudica in her own time, insofar as can be established, must be to look back into the depths of time and culture. Is there something primitive in the human heart which can be held accountable for the mingled awe, horror, and ecstasy which so often attends the manifestation of a warrior queen in our midst? Is it the deep-rooted allegiance which we owe to the idea of woman as goddess, which makes her fleshly apparition before us, fully armed in the guise of the warrior queen, so thrillingly traumatic? Let us begin with the Celtic goddess and see how far chariot-driving Boadicea descends from her, for it is to her, if anyone, that Boudica must have been related in the perceptions of her British contemporaries, those who teamed after her. And that's the end of chapter 1. So chapter 2 will be Antique Glories. Where is that antique glory now become? What Willem want in women to appear? Some of these pages are not great. Okay, here's a picture of the book I've been reading you. And again, I always encourage you to buy the book and read along. And I do that because it's funny to me. I think, why on earth would you do that? Here I am doing it to the beautiful sky. And I would hope that you wouldn't really actually do that. But this one may be different. It might be something to give someone else. Maybe that's why we buy the books then. But thank you for being with me. I appreciate you. I mean, really, like, I mean it. I appreciate each and every person who takes the time to listen to me read to you. Whether you're awake or asleep, I am thanking you all the same. I appreciate you.